Hey guys, this is George, and I'm back with a new video. So I had a chance to read the last issue of House of X. This is issue 6 of 6. I was really surprised with how this ended, and I'll let you know more about it. So before we jump into this review and discussion, I did want to say I really enjoyed this issue, and I think if you can, you should definitely head down to your local comic shop, pick up all of these issues, and just read them back to back, because each issue in the story builds on itself, and it's definitely worth reading. It's such a great story, and we'll talk more about it in a moment, but I definitely want to let you know there will be spoilers in this video. So if you have not read the comic and you don't want to be spoiled, you're more than welcome to come back after you've read it. But if you're still here and you still want to discuss this, well, let's get into the video. So here's some background on this issue. It is written by Jonathan Hickman and illustrated by Pepe Larraz. This story opens up a month from, I guess, present day, and we're about to see Xavier is about to do something big, and he's there with Magneto and Moira. So the big move that Xavier's making is that he announces to the whole world that he's going to be allowing these mutant drugs to go out to humanity and to be used by humanity and to benefit humanity. But in exchange, he has some terms. And it's this particular part of the issue is actually, it was kind of sad to me. I was actually a little bit saddened by it. And I'll let you know why. The reason why it actually saddened me is because Xavier goes on and he's talking about how at one point he really believed, and what he really wanted, his heart's desire essentially, was that he believed in peaceful coexistence between humanity and mutant kind. And after years of experience, years of seeing mutants tortured, killed, experimented on, he's had enough. And essentially he's saying these are the terms, and the terms are: 1, Krakoa has to be recognized as a sovereign state, and not just recognized, it actually has to be respected and treated as a sovereign state for all mutants. And the other term that he mentions, which I thought was interesting and makes a lot of sense, is that mutants would no longer be judged by any law other than mutants. Every mutant should be allowed a time to make their way to Krakoa if they choose to, so that they can escape any sort of adversity, any sort of mistreatment, and humanity should not persecute them. They should give them the time that they need to go to Krakoa. And that's what I took from that. The thing that I found was really sad was that he mentions how he tried so hard, how he really believed at one time that humanity coexisting with mutant kind was a possible outcome. And it actually makes me sad also, because I actually talk about this in another video, that I think this comic may affect things going forward, and not just the status quo, but permanently affect changes. It sounds like Xavier's abandoned his dream of peaceful coexistence, and he tells them flat out, at one time I would have given you these drugs because I believe it would have made relations between humans and mutants better, but he talks about being long past that. And for me, it was a really sad moment, and I'm hoping that's not the case, but at the same time, it does fit in the story, and it does fit with the direction that Xavier, Magneto, and the rest of mutant kind seems to be going in. And so with that, he gives them the rules, and he lets them know, you will benefit from this, but we will also benefit from this, and these are my terms, and they're non-negotiable. And so I thought that was really interesting. You actually get to see the reactions of the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and some other people also. There's the Omega Sentinel, and everybody in the world is reacting to this. And I'm just going to read you this line that I thought was really impressive and really interesting. And this is Xavier. It says, "You closed your eyes last night believing this world would be yours forever. That was your dream, and like mine, it was a lie." And so, you know, it just kind of cements the fact that Xavier's thinking is far beyond what it used to be. And I don't know if he'll ever go back to thinking peaceful coexistence is the way to go, because this seems to imply that they're far beyond that, and they won't go back to that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so this issue as a whole, there's not a lot, if any, action in this issue, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is an issue where you're going to think a lot, and I really like that about this issue, because I think this issue itself is kind of like the calm before the storm. And I think so, since this issue is kind of like a thinking issue, and it seems like things are actually going well for mutant kind, well, anyone who knows comics knows that, especially for mutants, things can't go well for too long. And I really think that things are going to hit the fan, either in Powers of 10 or in further down the line in Hickman's X-Men run. but we'll talk more about that in a little while. So one of the appendix pages, we actually see nearly all of the Quiet Council of Krakoa. There's only one field blacked out, and that's the 9th seat for the Red King. And that one's actually blacked out, but the others we see listed, it's actually Professor X, Magneto, Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, Exodus, Mystique, Sebastian Shaw, Emma Frost, Storm, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Cypher, and Krakoa. And a little bit further down, it talks about the Great Captains. And I thought this was really interesting because I actually thought Cyclops would have a seat on the council. I'm actually very surprised about Nightcrawler having a seat on the council, just because I wouldn't think that Nightcrawler would want to contribute to something that could potentially harm other mutants or humans. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But Cyclops is actually one of these great captains, and he's actually the superior of the great captain. So he's actually considered first among equals, and there's 4 of them. So Cyclops is the first. The other 3 are Gorgon, Bishop, and Magic. And so I'm actually kind of surprised at these choices. I mean, I can kind of see Bishop being one of these captains, but I would think maybe Wolverine or Cable might also be. I'm surprised about Magic. I think she is very powerful, but I just didn't know she had, I guess, that sort of leadership ability that people would follow her or defer to her like that. But I guess they are letting us know that she's capable of that, and so that is pretty interesting. And so the next part of the issue, we actually jump to the present, and it's a summoning of the council. And it's cool because I was reminded of the Lord of the Rings, but it's not that. But what everyone's joined together to do is to decide the laws of the land. This was a really interesting dialogue between the different perspectives on this council, because you have a few X-Men, you have Sebastian Shaw, who's essentially still a villain, you have Sinister, Exodus, Mystique, you have Apocalypse, you have Magneto, you have Krakoa, and Cypher. There's a lot of conflicting views here, and it's really interesting seeing everyone play off each other. And so what ends up happening is that Krakoa brings forth Sabretooth, and they're essentially judging Sabretooth. And of course, anyone who knows Sabretooth knows that he's guilty of, basically, Sabretooth's done everything that you can think of, and he has no remorse. He's essentially somebody who doesn't care, and he's what I think they call a repeat offender, somebody who's just gonna keep doing what he's doing, and he doesn't care. And so they've gathered here to discuss his fate. And so among other things, they talk about the laws. One of the really interesting things is that they do decide that mutants will not take human life, and it's different if they're being attacked or invaded, but just in the day-to-day ongoings of things, mutants cannot take human life. So that's something that's decided upon. Apocalypse doesn't look like he's enjoying it. He doesn't really care. He doesn't give a crap about humanity. But like he mentioned before in other issues, he's going to abide by these laws. And one of the other things I wanted to talk about is Mr. Sinister in this issue. He's pretty hilarious. He's really eccentric, and he's just joking. He's having a good time with everything. This version of Sinister is pretty cool. We're used to seeing kind of the creepy, weird Sinister. Every time I hear him, I think of the voice from X-Men, the animated series, kind of that weird, snakish voice. But in this issue, he seems like he's having a good time, and he just seems like a different version of the character. But even though on the surface he seems like he's kind of jovial and not as dangerous as he normally is, I don't actually believe that. I think Sinister is still just as maniacal and just as malevolent as he normally is. But I think on the exterior, he's kind of somebody who's a little bit different and is kind of also enjoying things. This personality, this version of Sinister, is someone who also knows how to have a good time. So I think he's really enjoyable in this issue. Another interesting topic is when Sebastian Shaw brings up, well, what about property, wealth, ownership? And Cypher chimes in and he talks about Krakoa being a living being, and that Krakoa would more than likely not be on board with people cutting out plots of land and developing gas stations on them. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And Exodus actually chimes in with something that I thought was very important, and he talks about how they are dependent on Krakoa and they should really cherish Krakoa. And I thought that was a very good way of thinking about it. And so that actually becomes a law of the land that they are going to do their best to preserve and to treat Krakoa as well as they can. And so one of the other things that's cool, so like I said earlier, these interactions are gold. They're really very good. And it plays on relationships between characters. And I'll let you know what I mean by that. Because Mystique is the next person to chime in. and she actually directs something toward Nightcrawler, and she's being kind of condescending because we know that Nightcrawler does have very strong religious beliefs and he holds to them. She wants to know what his opinion is because he believes in a higher power than Professor X. She's kind of being a little condescending, but at the same time, it's interesting to hear Nightcrawler's response because he does respond with Bible quote, and he actually determines that mutant kind should create more mutants. So he's essentially saying that mutants should procreate, and that's something that Professor X actually agrees with. And so that's just another really interesting interaction that you get in this issue. And finally, the last bit after the laws are decided. So the laws are actually make more mutants, murder no man, respect the sacred land. After those are decided, they turn their attention to Sabretooth, and they're going to decide what happens to Sabretooth now. And like I mentioned earlier, Sabretooth seems to have done every terrible thing you could ever imagine. So whatever happens to him, it's not like he doesn't deserve it, but we're going to discuss that now. And so essentially everyone, it's across the board, everyone agrees that Sabretooth should be punished by the laws of the land. Whatever they decide to do, whether it's put him to death or something else, they agree that Sabretooth should be punished. And I actually thought this was a little bit interesting just because of all the people who I thought might show some sort of mercy. I really thought Nightcrawler might speak up for him and might talk about how they should show some mercy. They should give him a chance just because Nightcrawler holds very strong religious views. And especially since it's a new beginning with the island, Krakoa, and mutants essentially coming there, they've kind of offered sanctuary to even the worst villains like Apocalypse and such, and Apocalypse wasn't put on trial. He's actually on this council. So I thought that they might extend that same olive branch to Sabretooth and give him one last chance. Not that it would mean anything because Sabretooth's basically a repeat offender and he would keep doing what he's going to do. And Sabretooth threatens them. He's like, you can tell Sabretooth's pissed. It almost looks like he wants to cry. He's that kind of messed up because he knows he's about to face the wrath. The shoe's about to come down hard on him. And he's just like, I'm going to hunt your family. I'm going to hunt your kids, and I'm going to end your bloodline. It's kind of a cool Sabretooth moment too. At the same time, it was a little strange seeing everyone across the board just say, no, we're not going to deal with this. You know, get rid of Sabretooth. Do what you need to do with Sabretooth. We're not going to leave it to chance. And that makes sense too. I think other than Sinister's kind of snarky remark, the other really funny response here is that Emma Frost says, oh, absolutely. You can just see this is Emma's character. Like, she doesn't care. She doesn't like Sabretooth. She doesn't want anything to do with the guy. If they're going to punish him, she's just like, let's get on with it. I got better things to do. And so I thought that was pretty funny there. But I would say out of Storm, Nightcrawler, and Jean, nobody gives Sabretooth the benefit of the doubt, and nobody wants to give him another chance. Everyone says Sabretooth should be punished, whatever that punishment might be, because we don't know what punishment is in store for Sabretooth just yet. And so Xavier lets him know, all right, Sabretooth, you've been judged guilty, and he lets him know what his punishment is. So Krakoa is essentially going to trap Sabretooth deep within him, and Xavier describes this that he's going to be exiled, and he's going to be kind of in like this suspended animation where he's going to be aware, but at the same time, he can't do anything about it. And I thought that was actually pretty cool. I think in a way it shows mercy, but at the same time, this is actually something that could be considered a fate worse than death. So Sabretooth is getting punishment that I think is maybe justly deserved, because it would be very hard to kill him. I'm sure they can kill him, but Xavier mentions that if they kill him, he would just end up coming back on the Xavier protocol, where they, I guess, create a new body and they bring him back, because I think they're going to do that for all mutants no matter what. So essentially you see Sabretooth dragged down into Krakoa, and it's a really cool scene. And I would say if there's any action, that was the only action in this issue. And it really lets you know Xavier is pretty hardcore and he's not going to put up with any stuff. I think back to the old X-Men the Animated Series episode where Xavier tries to help Sabretooth and he goes into his mind, and they're like battling people together, and it's like in this Xavier Sabretooth hybrid, and he's bald with like mud chops, I think. And it's just a really interesting thing because this is not that Xavier. This Xavier, he has no chill, and he's not putting up with anything. So it was really cool seeing that, and it looks like Sabretooth's going to be gone for a long time. And so at the end of the issue, they adjourn, and they go out to celebrate with the rest of Krakoa, and you see this is a paradise. Everything seems to be happy. It seems like they're throwing one enormous party right now for all of mutants, and it just seems like everyone's having a great time. They're partying, there's fireworks, Dazzler's doing a light show and singing, and Siren seems to be amplifying her voice. You see the other X-Men, Beast, Archangel, Iceman having a good time. X is actually talking with the mutant children and telling them stories. And something else that I thought was interesting that I might be looking into too much, well, there's a cool scene with Cyclops, Wolverine, and Marvel Girl, or Jean, and they each take a beer, and Wolverine goes to give a beer to someone, but the panel kind of lingers on Scott and Jean. And to me, I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like they might return to their relationship, that Cyclops and Jean might go back to being an item. And I know how I feel about that. I loved Cyclops and Jean as a couple when I was growing up, but I really have to credit Grant Morrison with what he did with White Queen, just because that relationship actually seemed kind of genuine to me. And we got years with Scott and Emma Frost together, and I actually liked that. I didn't hate that. So it's kind of hard now. I don't know where they're going to go with that. It might not be anything. Cyclops and Emma Frost and Jean Grey, they might all go their separate ways. There might not be anything there. But from what I saw in these panels, it seems like they could possibly head in that direction. And it essentially just shows everyone having a good time. The only person who doesn't seem like he's having a good time is Apocalypse. But at the same time, he might be. He might just be happy. He might be content. Because we see Apocalypse sitting by himself, but Apocalypse is always alone. And so maybe we might see him doing more, joining the group more. But at this point, he's sitting by himself. But in my opinion, I don't think he looks angry, and he might actually be content, even though he is kind of a loner and he hasn't bonded with anybody, and I don't think he will for a very long time, if he does at all. But the issue ends with a really cool line from Magneto and Xavier, and they're just standing side by side, and Magneto says, "Just look at what we have made." And so that's where the issue ends. We have another appendix where it shows Krakoa and some of the different sites on Krakoa, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But this issue as a whole, even though it doesn't seem like there was a lot of action or a lot of stuff going on, there really was, because they established the laws. I think these are going to be very important things going forward. I honestly can't think of anything negative to say about this issue. I mean, there was so much. It wasn't too cerebral like the other issues where they're using terminology that I think I'd have to look up. I mean, I do watch a lot of YouTube videos about science and such, so I was already kind of aware of those things, but I don't know them well enough to speak on them. And so, I mean, Jonathan Hickman is that talented and that knowledgeable that he can use these terms very well in this story, and they seem like they fit. But unfortunately for somebody like me, I do need to study up on these more before I can speak on them with confidence. But in this issue, I don't think there's anything like that. It's very straightforward, and even though there's a lot of dialogue, even though there isn't very much action, there is a lot of things happening in this issue, very important things happening in this issue. And so even though this is the conclusion of House of X, we do still have Powers of X number 6. And I think this issue was the calm before the storm, because everything seems to be going well for the X-Men. They actually seem to be happy. Mutant Kind seems to be happy. One of the really cool things I saw on the panel that I really wanted to mention is that you just see mutants all together just having a good time. You actually see Cinch from Generation X and Skin. And I actually thought these characters were dead, but maybe they've been brought back, or maybe they were just brought back earlier and I didn't see it. But everyone looks like they're having a good time, and it's really cool seeing these characters just being happy, because normally in comics, characters don't get to be happy. There's usually something going on. There's usually some battle to plan for. There's usually someone who died that they have to lay to rest. But in this issue, everything's good. Even if somebody dies, you know, they can bring them back. And so it's almost eerie thinking about how good things are going for Mutant Kind right now. And all I can think of is, in the next issue or down the line, something very bad is going to happen. And I don't know what, but I just think it's going to be very bad. And I don't want to say I'm looking forward to it. It's hard to think of that. It's hard to say I want bad things to happen to you, even if they're characters in your favorite stories, because you love these characters. But at the same time, the way this is going, it almost seems like it's trying to tell us that this is not going to last. And so that's the impression I got from the book. Excellent story. I really enjoyed it. You really should pick these up, because every issue is building on the other issue. And I would say, if you can, you should read these issues as they come out. It's just a phenomenal series. Jonathan Hickman's doing such a great job with the story. I'm loving the artwork. The pacing's very good in this story. It's fast. There's not very much action in the story, but like I mentioned, the dialogue, the story is very important. What we're seeing in this story isn't fluff and isn't unnecessary storytelling. This is all building to something, and hopefully it's a really good payoff whenever we do see the big picture. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to my channel for more comic book content, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.